Okay, so I just spent a minute adding in some filler data to that new Postgres database that we have up on Heroku. So I added in some profiles and projects just to make sure the website looks complete and filled out. And now I am ready to put this up on a live server. So for this, we are going to be using a service called Heroku. So Heroku gives us a web server that we can use to deploy our application to. So by the end of the video, we are going to have a live link and this website will be publicly available. So let's just go ahead and either go to Heroku.com or just search up Heroku, and this should give you the link to the website. So you are going to need to create an account if you don't have one, and you will need a credit or debit card on file. So if you don't have one, Heroku will not let you create an account. So sorry about that, but you are going to need a credit or debit card on file, even though there are free tiers and free options available. So this is what your dashboard is going to look like when you first log in. In here, there are apps here that I already have. I'll blur those out because anybody in theory can go to that app name and then just do .herokuapp.com and they can access one of my apps here. So in this interface here, if you have just created your account here, you're going to see this new button and you're obviously not going to have any apps yet. So go ahead and click on new and go to create app. So the app name does have to be unique. So you can't do something like Apple. Let's just try that. This is going to say this is not available. So there's probably somebody out there with an app name called Apple. So just go ahead and find a unique name here. I'm going to do dev search. So you won't be able to do this. You can do dev search 1, 2, or whoever's created an account. Just make sure it's unique and that's it. So add in some kind of prefix or suffix to it and find a name that's open. So we don't have to select anything here. Go ahead and do create app. And this is going to create our app. So automatically we're taken to that. So if I go back to the main website here, we're going to see our app in here. So I'm not going to scroll because I don't want to have to blur out more, but my app is now in this list. So this new app. So this is the interface. So we can see that we're in our account and now inside of the dev search app. So if I go to open app, we see this domain. So this is the domain that Heroku just gave us. So we have no application yet, so we need to deploy it here and then replace all of this with this website. So this is now publicly available. Anybody can access this. So inside of our interface, I'm just going to do a quick breakdown. I'm not going to be explaining everything about Heroku, but we'll just do a quick breakdown of the tabs and how things work. So the first thing is we have all these add-ons that we can work with. So if we go into add-ons, let's go into find more. There's a lot of services that Heroku works with. So we can use Redis. There's also Postgres databases directly tied to Heroku. I don't use that. I think that's just for testing. I've never actually used it in production, but there's a whole bunch of add-ons to go with that. And if we scroll down, we're also going to see something called dynos here. So dyno information, these are basically just Linux containers, virtual Linux containers. And this is how Heroku actually triggers our servers. So we connect to our WSGI file, our web server file, and this is what Heroku does to actually connect and execute our code. So dynos are basically these process types here that we can connect here. If we want to speed up our server, this is one way to do it. We can access premium dynos. So by default, you will get a free version. So any project we create is going to be on a free dyno. The only thing that's going to change here is that dyno is going to be very slow. And if you exceed a certain amount of usage on it, eventually it just won't work until the next month once your usage comes back. So you get a limit each month here. So we also have the ability to add different collaborators. So if we want to work with somebody else, we can actually go ahead and send somebody an invite here. So we would just add a collaborator, add their email, and then multiple people can access this and work on it if you're working with a team. Let's go to resources here. So this is our dyno information. We can also add in add-ons from here. To deploy here, we are going to have a few options to actually deploy this application. So by default, it's set to the Heroku CLI here. And this does create a GitHub account actually, or it actually does push your code up into a GitHub repo. We can also use the direct connection to GitHub, which is the method I like to use. And we also have these containers. So I've never used this one. I've used the Git CLI version and GitHub. So the reason why I like this version is what we're going to do is we're actually going to connect or push our project up to our GitHub account. So completely separate from Heroku, we're just going to log into our GitHub account, create this project, set it to private so nobody can see our information. And then we're going to connect our GitHub repo here. So we'll have to log into our GitHub account. I, by default, am already logged in. So you'll have to add in your GitHub credentials. And then all you need to do is find your repo name, and then your project is now connected to Heroku. So once it connects, all we're going to do here is click deploy. So you're going to have an option to deploy it, and it's going to take all that GitHub code and it's going to deploy it to Heroku. So Heroku is simply going to pull that code from your GitHub repo. So that's how we're going to deploy it. We'll get into that in a second. Let's go into metrics here. So this is going to tell us information about our app here. It's useful to look at once we're actually in production. Activity, so that's just an activity feed when we're deploying it, or if we have any fails, we're going to see all that here. So access here, this is where we can also add collaborators, and then our settings tab. So settings is going to give us basic information about our app here. We can have environment variables. So at some point, I mentioned this earlier, where we're not going to want to store passwords and secret keys inside of our Django application, just in case I don't want that stuff up on GitHub. So we're going to create environment variables locally to access our application, and we're going to do this live. So this is where we would put our environment variables. So if we did something like db_password, so we'll just do db_pass, and then you would add in your password here. So then your application would simply use these environment variables to connect to. So we also have build packs. So we'll do this right now, actually. We'll just go ahead and do add a build pack. And this is simply the language that we're using for our application. So Django runs on Python here. So we're going to select that here, and Heroku actually integrates pretty well. So let's just select Python and set that. So it tells us that this new configuration will be deployed on our next app deployment. So we'll do that in a bit here. We can also add in an SSL ticket, and we can also connect to a custom domain. So if we want to buy a domain, this is where we would attach it. Maintenance mode basically says that when our project's live, I actually had to do this during a live stream where somebody messed with the website that I deployed because I did it in a live stream. It wasn't that secure. Somebody was running some kind of code where they were just making requests and setting up like pictures and stuff on the website right during the live stream. So I just had to turn this on. So if I enable maintenance mode, if I go to this URL here, it's just going to say offline for maintenance, and that's it. So it just basically like powers down your website, and then you can always just return it on, and that's it. If we want to delete the app here, you'll want to go ahead and add in your app information here, and then that can remove it. So that's the overview of Heroku. And now what we want to do is connect our Django application. So we created an app here. So back from your dashboard on the top right, you had a new app link here. We created that. I just ran through the tabs here. We added a build pack, and that's it. So we haven't connected to our GitHub repo yet. So let's just go ahead and take a look at how Heroku and Django connect. So there is documentation on how to specifically connect a Django and Heroku app. So there are some minimums that we are going to have to set up that Heroku tells us to do. So they have their own way of going about things. So in order to deploy a Python application, which Django does use Python, we at a minimum are going to need this requirements.txt file. So we're not going to be using pipefile and setup.py, but requirements.txt is something that we do need. So this requirements just simply going to tell Heroku all the dependencies that this website needs. Heroku is going to run through this file, find the dependency and the version of it, and then install it. So we have those installed locally, and then Heroku also needs to install it to make our website work. So some of those dependencies would be Django itself. So it needs to know to install Django and what version. We also have packages like White Noise. We have Django REST Framework. So these would all be listed inside of requirements.txt. So there's also some minimal for a Django application. So in this case, this is expected files for Python here. And if we go here, we can see working with Django. So it's a subcategory here. And there's a few other things here. So configuring Heroku apps to Django. Let's just take a look at this. We are going to need a proc file. So this simply is going to use a package that we're about to install called gunicorn or Gunicorn, whatever you want to call it. And this is going to be a connection to our WSGI file. So this is a web server gateway interface, and this is how we know how to connect our dyno. So we're going to run a pip install for gunicorn, and then we're going to connect it. So we're also going to need a runtime.txt file. So that's all in the docs here. Runtime.txt is simply telling Heroku which version of Python we're using. So we're just prepping everything and setting it up. So let's go ahead and just run through these. So I'm actually going to copy this really quick. So we're going to copy pip install gunicorn, and let's just go ahead and install that. So we'll go back in here. I'll open up my terminal here, run that installation. So I'm gonna have to do python -m and then pip install gunicorn. So with that being said, we also need to add this domain right here to our allowed host. So if you go back to that static files video, this is where we did everything. We had to allow host here for whenever debug is set to false. So once we deploy this, debug is going to be set to false. So we're going to change this. So in order to make this work, we've been working locally. So localhost and port 8000 worked once we added that. Now we need to add this domain. So I'm going to remove the / and then take out HTTP. So we're just telling it that this website is also now available from devsearch.herokuapp.com. And then if we ever buy a domain like devsearch.com, if that's available maybe, we would add that here too. So you need to make sure that all the domains that you're going to be using are added here. So it's a list. Now, let's go ahead and continue to the next step here. So we added this in allowed host. And now I want to set debug to false. So instead of changing it here, what I'm going to do here is check if we're live. So there's different ways of setting up your settings.py, but I'm just going to check if this project's live, and then we're going to set debug to false. So we're going to do this at the bottom of the website. So we'll say if the os.get current working directory, so os.get cwd. So this is typically going to be the working directory here. So it's just going to set a file path. But if we're live, the current working directory is going to be /app like that. So if we're live, the get current working directory value will be app like that. And if we're local, it's not going to be this. So it's just going to be a file path. So we want to check if we're live. In this case, when we're live on Heroku, that's what it's going to be. So now we're just going to set debug to false. So just to kind of repeat that, we are still setting debug to true when we're working locally. But if the current working directory is app here, and that's what it's going to be when we're on Heroku, this is going to be false. And if you have not installed OS, make sure that's installed. I believe I already have that installed, so I added that pretty much in the beginning of this entire course and set that up. So make sure that's ready. So now we also want to create the proc file. So that was something that Heroku told us to do. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and create a proc file in the root directory. So we'll just do new file, and this has to be P or capital P, and we'll just do proc file with no extension here. So right away, you're going to see that Heroku logo. So it's specifically designed for Heroku to actually make this work. And in here, we're going to set the type here. So we're going to set that to web space, and we're going to do gunicorn. So we ran this pip install. So this is where we're accessing it from. So we added the package, and we can do gunicorn. I just want to make sure I'm spelling that right. And then we can do space, and then our project name, which is dev search. So we're going into dev search here, or into that file name, and we are going into WSGI. So we are connecting this to this web server gateway interface. So we just connected to that, and that's going to allow Heroku to start up our server. And then we can just do --log, and then -file, and then end that with a dash. So make sure whatever you called your project, that's it. So we're just going back into that folder. So it's simply a file path, and it's connecting that with gunicorn. So I'm not sure why I'm seeing the double underscores here or all the lines underneath. Maybe it's just being weird. So we're going to ignore it for now, and let's just move on. So after our proc file, I do want my requirements. So we need to let Heroku know what to install. So in this case, I'm going to open up my terminal. Let's clear this, and we're just going to do a pip freeze, and then angle bracket like that. And then we're just going to do requirements. So requirements.txt. So what this command is going to do here is it's going to run a pip freeze. It's going to find everything that we have inside of our environment. So in this case, inside of that virtual environment, and it's just going to make me a requirements.txt file, which is going to appear right here. And then that's just going to show me all the dependencies. So this is what Heroku is going to read. So if I click that, apparently I have to do python-m. This is a really annoying error. We'll have to get this fixed eventually. So now I have to run python-m pip freeze. That probably worked for you. So for me, it didn't work. And make sure requirements is spelled the right way. So requirements. So it has to be spelled exactly like that. And in here, this is where we see all the requirements. So some of these we didn't install. These came with different packages. So for example, when we installed Django, these were already added. but we did install white noise. We added in Pillow, GUnicorn, the Django REST framework, Django Simple JWT, and all of that. So we see the package name or the module name and the version of it. So after our requirements, we also need a runtime.txt. So we'll do runtime.txt, and we're just going to specify the version of Python that we're using. So we're using Python, and then this is going to be -3-9-5. So that's the current version that I have. If you have a different version, make sure you're adding that so we can save that. So we added the proc file, requirements, runtime. We added in the allowed host in settings.py. And let's see. So I also want to add in a gitignore file. So we'll just do .gitignore. So if you're not familiar with what this is, when we're pushing our code to GitHub, there is a gitignore file that we can add, which basically says any files that we don't want pushed to GitHub, you can ignore these. So all we need to do is add in the file path. So I want to ignore my virtual environment. I don't want this pushed up into GitHub. It's a really big file, and anybody locally can just create their virtual environment and then set up their own environment. I don't want to deal with that. That's not something that we should actually take care of. So we're just setting env. So now when we push it, this folder will not be pushed. So we have that. We have the basic files. And if you didn't complete that extra version inside of our static files video where we added in white noise, make sure you do that because we are using white noise. So make sure that's pip installed. And then inside of your middleware, you have that right here. So in that video, I said that it was a little bit advanced for what we're taking care of. Now would be a good time to go back to that video. And if you didn't set this part up, make sure you do that. So configure white noise if you're following the same methods as me. So now what we want to do is get our code, and we want to push this up to GitHub. So if you don't have a GitHub account, go ahead and create one. So just go ahead and do GitHub, create an account. If you don't have one, go ahead and go to your repositories, and we're going to create a new repository. So this is simply, I guess I don't want to be explaining GitHub here, but this is a place where we can store code, and we can just, I guess, push code up here and then modify it, pull it, share it with anybody. So I'm going to create a new repo called dev search, and that's going to be the name here. In this case, make sure you set it to private. There's a specific reason to why we want to do this right now. So private means that nobody can access this, so they won't see it. So if they go to our GitHub account, they will not see it. So we won't worry about this. We'll add in our own README later. So let's go ahead and create a repository. So we want to add our code to this GitHub repo. So this is going to be a folder full of folders and files. So here's some instructions on how to get things set up locally. So without going into a full GitHub tutorial here and how Git works, I'm just going to try to recap what's going to happen here, and then we'll just move on to pushing our files here. So in here, we see a list of instructions on how to get a local repo set up. So we have a live repo. This is on my account, and right here we see dev search. This is where all the folders are going to be. So locally, we're going to use something called Git. We're going to initialize a repository, which is going to be exactly like what we have here. It's going to be like a copy of it. We're going to initialize it. We're going to add all our files to it. So all our project files are going to be added into that localized folder. So that localized repo, we're going to commit all our changes to it. And then we're going to set a remote, basically telling it where to push these files. In that case, this is the URL to push the files to. So that's this project here. So we're going to set a remote, and then we're going to push those changes. So we're going to run a push, and that's going to take all those files and put them up on our live GitHub account here. So that's what we're going to run through. We'll try to go as slow as possible. So before we start this, if you haven't already and you're not using GitHub here, go ahead and just look up Git. So we're going to need Git to work on this locally. So go ahead and run through this process here, download it. I'm on Windows here. I already have it downloaded. So let's see, let's just do Git download. So we'll go into downloads like that. So that's git-scm.com/downloads. So I'm on Windows, so go ahead and click on that, download the installer, and run through that. So once you download this, you're going to have something called the Git CLI here. So some people like to work directly from here. I actually like to use my command prompt or terminal, but just to make sure that it's all working, if you have this, that means that that was successful. You can also do git -- version. So that just tells you that you have GitHub installed and everything's good. So in order for you to use this, you might have to restart. If you're using VS Code or your command prompt, you might have to restart it just to make sure Git is available. So that command should now work either from VS Code or your command prompt. So git -- version, and just go ahead and test that. If it doesn't work, try restarting it. So it just needs to update it. So in here, what we're going to do is follow these instructions. So the first thing we're going to do here is run git init, and that's going to create a folder in a local repository. So let's just do git init, and that just initialized a local repository. So we don't see it here. That's currently not visible. So if we actually go into our folders here, let's go ahead and just close that out. So if we open up our folders and go into our desktop and then our project here, we're going to see this .git folder. You might not see it right away though. So the reason why you're not seeing it is because I have my view here for hidden items visible. So by default, usually on Windows, these are not going to be visible. So let me just try to make these a little bit bigger here. So by default, they're hidden. So just go to view and then go to hidden items and check that. So you're going to see that. I'm actually going to turn it off here. There's no reason to see it, but it's considered a hidden item. So that's what git init just did. So now what we want to do here is we want to take all of these files and we want to put those into that folder, that new git folder. So to do that, before we actually run that, we're going to run something called git status. And this is going to show me all the files that we are ready to commit. So these are inside of a staging area, and these are all of our project files. And it's basically saying that these are the files that are ready. Do you want to push these into the actual GitHub folder? So we could do something like git add and then select a specific file to add. So we can say, okay, let's add requirements.txt. So we'll just do requirements like that, or whatever. I can't spell that right, but you get the point. So we could add each individual file. If I want to add all of them, at this point, I am ready to add all of them. So I'm just going to do git add and then dot. So if I run that, that's going to add all those files into that staging area. So now if I run git status, we're going to see all of these in green. So that means these files are ready to be committed and actually added to that folder. So if I happen to make a change, we're going to run this multiple times. So let's actually, let's see. Let's just make a change inside of settings.py. So let's just add in a comment. So we'll just say testing, and that's it. So I'm going to save this now. And if I turn that off or close that out here, if I run git status, can't spell today. So if I run git status, we are going to see that a change was made in settings.py. So that one small change now needs to be added to the staging area. So again, I could just do git add and then do settings.py, but in this case, I'm going to do git add and then dot. That's going to add everything. And then we'll do git status. Okay, so all these files are in the staging area. So let's go ahead and look at these instructions here. We added those, and now we are ready to run our first commit. So commit is going to take all those local files, so all those green files that you see now, and those are going to be added into that local GitHub repo. So we'll just do git commit and then -m, and then I'm going to put in some quotes here, and I'm just going to say this is our first commit. And I don't know why I'm doing all this in caps here. I just happen to hold down shift, so that's what it's going to be. So with the commit, we can always add a note here. So that's going to be a note. So later on, when you're looking through your code, if you need to revert back to something or see all the changes you made, you can see all those notes. So that went ahead and created all those files, and now those are inside of that local GitHub file, the one that we just changed the visibility on. So in this process, if we want to rename the main branch here, we could do that. We could do git branch and then do -m and then main. I'm not going to bother with this. What I'm going to do here is use the default master version. So by default, there are something called branches here. We're not getting into GitHub on its own here, but there's different branches and versions of your project that you can work on. So by default, there's usually a master branch, and then you can set up any other branches. So in that case, I'm going to work with a default master branch. So we're just going to go ahead and set the remote. So go ahead and grab this URL here. So just grab the URL to your GitHub repo. So if you happen to get out of this page here and you don't have it, just go ahead and go to that URL. So the URL is right here, and just go ahead and do git remote. And let's see, I actually just forgot what that was. So it was a git remote add origin and then the URL. So git remote add origin, and then we paste in that URL that we have. So whatever your URL is, don't add dev search if that's not the name of your GitHub repo. So we'll go ahead and add that, and now I can do git remote -v, I think it was -v, and that tells me what I'm connected to. So now my local files need to be pushed into that remote. So this is how it knows where to push it. We took that URL there and we're gonna connect it. Now, on your first attempts, you are gonna be prompted to make sure that you can actually make these changes. So you'll probably be prompted for your GitHub username and password and email. So you'll have to run through those configurations. So now let's run that final command to actually add this code. So now we can do git push -origin and then whatever your branch is called. So we left ours at master, or I did. If you happen to go through this process, do main, or if you used another name here, just use that name. So we're going to push it into a specific branch. So now let's go ahead and go back here. I left mine as master. Well, we didn't update it, so that's the default. So we'll just do git push -u. So that's the upstream, and we're doing origin. So origin like that. So if I run that, let's see, what did I do wrong? Git push -u. So we'll just copy that, and then we'll just say master. So we'll change that to master like that. And there we go. Okay, so now that's working. I must have misspelled something. So what that just did is it took all that code that we added into our local GitHub repo and it pushed it to that live branch. So if I go ahead and refresh this now, so if I go into dev search, here are all of our project folders with that commit. So it tells us when we committed it. And you're going to notice that we don't see that env folder because we added that to git ignore. So it ignored that during the push. And all of our project files are available on github.com now. So we're going to do a few things here. So you notice that we didn't put any of our code inside of environment variables. So we're going to fix that in a minute. So I wanted to get this project live because it's private. So no one's going to see these passwords or anything like that anyways. So we're going to change these a little bit later. So typically you'd put these in environment variables, but I want to make that the last step so we don't get stuck anywhere here. So we're going to update this in a minute, but for now, let's go ahead and now go into Heroku. So we're going into Heroku and let's go into our app, the one that we created, and let's go to deploy. So go ahead and select GitHub if this is the method that you're using and connect to your GitHub account and just start looking for your project. So we'll just do dev. And then if I just do search, that should find this new GitHub repo. So go ahead and click on connect. So now Heroku is connected to this project. So there is something that we can do, which is called enable automatic deploys. So that means that we don't have to click this deploy button. All we need to do is anytime we make a push to this branch, it's just going to automatically deploy on Heroku too. So we could set that. I'm going to leave that like that. We're going to do it manually. And here are our branches. So we're just deciding what branch to deploy. So in this case, we are just going to hit deploy and see what happens and make sure that everything's working. If we get any errors, we're going to work those out. So this is going to take a minute. So we're going to see all these logs here. It's going to go through this process and it's going to start installing everything that this application needs. So it's going to look into requirements.txt. It's going to download everything. It's going to check our runtime and just make sure that it can set up this project. Okay, so it looks like everything went right here. It all deployed. So I actually want to show you an error that you might be seeing. So you might actually see an error and it says something like collect static wasn't able to run or whatever that was. So if you have that error, I'm going to show you what that is in a second and show you a quick solution on how to fix that and also give you some ideas on what that can be. So at this point, our application deployed successfully, but it doesn't mean that everything is perfect yet. So we need to view the application. So we can view it from here, or we could just go to open app. So let's take a look and there we go. So we have an error. So this is one of the most frightening errors to a lot of people because it doesn't tell us anything. So we need to go ahead and just try to debug. I actually have no idea what's going on here. So let's first talk about that collect static error and then I'm going to debug this. So we're just going to look up Heroku collect static error. Let's just look that up because a lot of people have this issue. So let's see. So you might see something like this. So collect static, no input, and then it just gives you all these errors. So it'll look something like this. So in this case, Heroku's solution for it is simply just to disable collect static if you're not using your static files. Now, this error usually occurs when you don't configure something like white noise. If that configuration was wrong, that error appears. So what's happening here is Heroku is actually trying to run that collect static command, but it can't do it. So in the first run, sometimes this happens. So go ahead and just go into your application. So just go ahead and write in disable_collect static. So I'm going to copy this, but you can write that out here. So what you could do is go into settings, go into your environment variables. And by the way, I didn't set this up. That was set up by default. So we can actually remove that later. So that's just a default database that Heroku gives us. And we're using AWS, so we're not actually using it. So I can't delete it here. It won't let me. So let's actually just take care of that right now. So let me just delete it. So we'll go in here and you notice that we have our dyno set up. It's on a free tier. This is where we can upgrade those. So kind of going on a tangent here. So we'll just go into resources and we'll look at those dynos in a second. So we'll take this hobby database and we're just going to delete it. So I don't need it. So we'll just do dev search and that will remove that database. So if you happen to want to connect your database in there, you can. Now for the dyno itself, you could go into resource, go to change dyno, and you can get on these paid tiers. And it basically means that it will actually speed up your website depending on what the issue is with it. So the free dyno is very slow, and this is one of the ways you can actually speed up your website. Okay, so side tangent here, let's go into settings, let's go into reveal config vars, and then just add in disable collect static and set that to 1. So try this. If you have that error, set it to 1, run that build again. If the build works, just go ahead and set this back to 0. So you're actually going to turn off disable collect static. So it's basically saying that on the first run, it's not going to run collect static. So this issue occurs in random times, I think, or I swear that it occurs randomly to me. Sometimes I have everything figured out and it just won't deploy. So that's just one of those things that you could do if you get this error. Okay, so let's move on to the actual error that I am facing right now. So in order to do this, we are being told to go into the Heroku CLI and type that in to check the build logs and see what this error could be. So we haven't done this yet. I actually have this downloaded already, but I haven't showed you how to do this. So just go ahead and look up the Heroku CLI. So if you're using that Heroku method to deploy, you would actually go through this process and download it. But just go into the Heroku CLI here. Go ahead and download it. So you're going to be shown some options on how to download it. Go through this part here. If you're using Windows, just download the 64-bit installer if that's what you need for your machine, and there are other options. So just Google up Heroku CLI and that should set that up and give you the installer. So once you have that installer downloaded, you can actually access it directly from the command prompt, or you can access the Heroku CLI directly from the command prompt. So if you already had it open, get that installer downloaded, and then you might have to reopen up your terminal or your command prompt in order to make it work. So it's kind of like the Git one, so you might just have to refresh it. So from here, once the CLI is downloaded, you can actually do Heroku login, and I'm logged in the browser here. So when I run this command, I'm going to be prompted to press any key here. So I'm just going to hit enter, and what's going to happen here is it's going to open this up here and tell me to log in, and we're going to see this once we officially log in. And now we can use it inside of our CLI. So it's telling us to go back, and now we have full access here. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually follow this error. So we can use a CLI, and this is where we want to run this command from. So Heroku logs -- tail. So in this case, that's going to give us all the logs to our apps. So we'll just do Heroku logs -- tail. But if we want to find a specific app that's causing this error, we can do Heroku logs -- tail, and then -app or -app, and then the app name. And I also noticed I misspelled my app. So it's Dev Search. Trying to figure out maybe I can rename that. Well, we're going to delete this after anyways, or I'm going to delete it. So the name doesn't matter, but let's just go ahead and take that right there. So I realized that, or I thought that looked kind of funny, but I guess we found that issue. So we add in the app name. Whatever your app name is, go ahead and do this. Follow that error message, and let's go ahead and run it and see what the issue is. So when I run this, this is kind of scary to look at for the first time. So if you're looking through here, let's just kind of look for the red here. So we're trying to see what the error is. We see some up here actually. Build succeeded. So this is like the logs to our entire application. So we're seeing something occur here. Okay, and it's kind of hard to decode, but once you kind of get used to looking at it, things will be a little bit more recognizable. So I keep seeing gunicorn is an unrecognized argument. So let's see. Okay, so this is in our proc file right here. And I think we need a space right there with that last hyphen. So let's try this. Let's push it again, and then let's see if that fixes it. So inside of WSGI, no, it wasn't in there. It was in proc file. I think what's happening here is there needs to be a space here. I'm wondering if it's also with these, even though I don't see the error itself. So I'm pretty sure that's what was causing it. So anytime we make a change, I'm actually glad that error happened because it lets me show you that. So we'll just do get status here and then get add, get status. And we don't have to run get status the first time. That's just to make sure that we have changes. I just wanted to make sure that was applied. So now let's just do get push or get commit first. So we want to commit those to our local repository. So we'll just say fixed proc file. And we'll just do capital P. And then we'll do get push -u origin and then your branch name. So origin, and mine was master. So I left it at the default. So we run those changes. Now we need to go back into Heroku here. I was going to say GitHub. And this is a cool thing. So if you configured inside of deploy here, if you configured automatic deploys, that would start deploying right away. So you could enable those. Let's just go ahead and do that if we run into this again, and that's going to happen automatically for us on the next push. So now we just want to hit deploy again, run through this process and see if that error still shows up. So we'll scroll down here and just kind of watch this run through. So none of the errors occurred in this process, so it should work just fine. It was just in the actual connection of when Heroku was trying to start up our application or start up that server. So we'll just give this a minute. Okay, so it deployed it again. So let's go ahead and do Control-Shift-R, or you could just do a refresh, and let's see if this is working. So moment of truth, and there we go. So that is on a live server. So this link is actually not what you're gonna be able to see in production. I actually have a version of this. It's called Django-2021.Heroku app. A lot of you probably know this. This is where there are real accounts. So these are real students that are creating accounts. So if you want to see the live version, check this one out. But this is the live version that we just pushed. So this is a fully ready website. We can go through, just make sure everything's actually working. And because our static files are on AWS and our database is on AWS also, our information kind of gets spread out between all these applications. So our server is now hosting all of this. So now that we got this taken care of, if you're this far, congratulations, you deployed your application. What I want to do now is actually show you some more secure methods and making sure that you don't accidentally spill any secret keys or passwords to somebody. So what if you invite somebody to look at your code? Well, you might not always know everybody or trust everybody, so you don't know who's actually gonna do anything malicious with your code or not. So if they open up our application on GitHub here, so they can easily go into our application, and in here we have very sensitive information. So we have our database password here, we have our secret keys. So if they get access to this, they can log in and do some very bad things here. So we want to make sure that none of this is visible. We want to make sure that none of this is visible. So we're going to take our AWS information, and we're also going to take our database information. And then I also disconnected my email password. So that would be also something that I would add into my environment variables. But for now, I'm going to skip those, but I would recommend that you do this too. So I'll show you the database and the AWS stuff, and then you should do this for the email password if you also have that built in. So the first thing I want to do is do this locally. So if you're on Windows, you could just go to your search bar here and just start typing in env, and you should get these environment variables here. So if you're on a Mac, just look up how to get your environment variables from that system. But from Windows, you just look up env. So we're going to open up our environment variables, and I already have some here. So what I'm going to do is just remove those. I want to make sure that nobody can see those. This is private information, so I'll just be deleting these, and we're going to get prepped to set up our new ones. Okay, so all of those are deleted. I don't have any sensitive information exposed. And what I'm going to do now is go to my local project here. So we'll just open these up, and we're going to connect these with those environment variables. So I'm going to create a few variables here. The first one I'm going to do is going to be for my database password here. So we'll just go ahead and set this up here inside of our user variables. So we're not doing system, we're doing user variables. Go ahead and do db_pass here. So db pass, and the password here for what I set up was Dennis123. So you would add in your own credentials. So we added in db pass. We also want to do db_user, and that was Dennis Ivy. And I'm just going to do db_host. So I would recommend you go through whatever you need here. I'm just going to do the stuff that I need. So I'd recommend maybe updating even like the port number. And I just realized that's supposed to be port. Why is that post? Okay, so I don't know how the heck that still worked. Okay, so we're just going to take this URL here. So grab your endpoint and let's just add that here. So we'll add in a new environment variable and we'll do db_host. And then we'll paste that in here. So nobody will ever see this. This will be on our system. So we also want to do this for our AWS stuff. And again, if you have your emails, create some environment variables for those too. So for that email and password. So AWS access key ID. So let's just take all of this and we're going to bring this in here. So we'll do new, paste that all here. And then I'm just going to take this value without the quotes, paste that down here, and we're going to remove all of that. So make sure there's no space anywhere here. So we're just adding these. We'll do the secret key. Again, we'll just keep adding that to that environment variable. So secret key, take this value here, paste that down here, backspace, add that, and then the bucket name. So the bucket name is not that private. I mean, I would still recommend doing that. You might as well hide whatever you can, but we're just gonna do these two just for the sake of saving time. So now we have these environment variables inside of our system. So we want to connect to these. So they're set up here and we have full access to them. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and close this out. So if you're on your command prompt, you might need to completely close this out. I don't think we need to restart our computer, but we just need to refresh it so we can actually connect to those. So if you're on your terminal, just go ahead and close everything out and then reopen it. And now we can access these. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and go in here. And for the secret key, we're going to do OS. So you'll need that OS module imported. And we're going to do environ. So this is going into our local system. And we're going to get the environment variable. So in this case, the environment variable was the same name. So we'll just do that. And let's just copy and paste this right here. Okay, so accidentally close that out there. Not sure how that happened, but I do think I copied that. So it did save it. So now we're going in and grabbing that secret key. We're going to paste this in here and we're going to paste in AWS secret access key. So we're accessing the environment variable by its name. And we're going to do the same for the password. So do that for your emails too. Just want to keep reminding you because someone's going to run into that issue. So let's just paste this in here and then we'll just do db_host. So db_host like that. Did I call it that? Let's see, db host. Okay, so this value is now going to be this string. So I keep reiterating it, but I think you get the point there. So let's just go ahead and make sure the comma's there. We'll do password and user. So these are going to be db user. So db user and then db pass. And I call that pass here, right? Okay, so that looks good. So we just connected our environment variable. So now these will never be exposed. So now let's just try to run our server and make sure it's connected. Again, you might have to restart your application. So go ahead and do that. But now from my terminal here, or not your application, but close out, whether it's your text editor or your command prompt, and just make sure all that's closed. So now I'm going to try to run my server. So we'll just do python manage.py run server. And let's see. So, all right, so everything connected. If I go to my application, let's do this locally. If I go here, the server is on and we are connected to the database, and that is now done through the environment variable. So the password is not here. So we're going into our device here, I guess. So we're going into our environment and we're getting that variable. So that's all stored in here now. So this is where we're getting our secret keys, our passwords, and all our database connections. So we did this locally, and now it's time to push this live. So right now, if I push this live, our website will not work because we're gonna look into Heroku's environment and try to find the same environment variables. So now we have to make these on Heroku. So in order to do this on Heroku, let's go ahead and open this up here, and let's see, we'll close out a few tabs here. We'll close out our local version, and this is our live project. Let's close out. Actually, we'll leave the GitHub account open. I wanna show you something there. So in GitHub, we're still linking to the actual passwords like that. So let's go ahead and change this. So we'll go into settings, and then in settings, we have our environment variables that we could set up. So let's go ahead and start prepping these. We'll go in here and let's get our DB user and password. So I remember the user and password, but the actual URL here is a little bit harder to remember. So we'll get this value here. We'll take that DB host, copy that, and let's go back to Heroku, and we'll just do DB underscore host. So DB host, paste in that value, we'll hit add, DB underscore pass. This is just Dennis123, add that, and then DB underscore user. So this is the equivalent of setting up our environment variables on our computer. So DB or Dennis Ivy, and then we need our secret key. So in here, we'll just do AWS underscore access underscore key ID. So we'll copy that here. And let's just go ahead and add that as the value, and then AWS underscore access underscore key underscore ID. Okay, add that. And then let's go ahead and do AWS secret access key. Copy that value, paste that in here. And let me just get this right here. Just want to make sure I'm spelling that right. And then let's add that as the key. So we'll hit add, and there we go. Okay, so the credentials should be lined up. Let's make sure we have no spaces here. So if I go to edit, just make sure there's no spaces, all the spelling's right. AWS access key ID, that's correct here. And now we can push. So when we push this new version to GitHub here, we first of all should see an automatic deploy, and then we should see our application now run with these environment variables. So basically all these username and passwords will be removed. We're gonna see our new code, and then that's gonna connect here. So let's go ahead and go to deploy here, and let's see if the automatic deploys are working. So they are enabled here, so it should be working now. So we'll go in here, we'll turn off our server now. At this point, this should be the last time we have to run this. So let's check the status. We updated settings.py. We'll add everything, check the status, git commit, and we'll just do -m, and we'll say setup env vars. And then git push -u origin master. So origin, like that, and then master. So whatever your main branch was called. So now inside of our GitHub account, if we share this, if we happen to share this information, this is all people are gonna see. So nobody can actually see our passwords and secret information. So one last time, I'm just gonna repeat it. Make sure you update your emails if you're using this, otherwise that will not work. So set those up in environment variables. Make sure your passwords are hidden, and then update anything else. I would recommend even hiding this bucket name, even though that's pretty easy to find. I just feel like the less people know, the better. So change things like the database name and so on. Okay, so I think the automatic deploy worked. Let's check our activity here. Okay, so it did work. So right now we're not seeing that in deploy, but we can see something's happening. So we didn't even have to press deploy. It just automatically happened because anytime we make a change or a push to that branch, the master branch or whatever you have yours set as, it's just going to start deploying it. So let's give this a second and let's make sure these environment variables are working. So I'll close out the project here, and we're going to open the app up brand new when this finishes. Okay, so the build succeeded. It looks like it's deployed. Let's see if those variables are working. So moment of truth here. Every time we make a new push, it usually takes a little bit. So there we go. This is now with our environment variables. Our application is live. We set up the environment variables, so we're secure now, and that is it for now. So any bonus videos will be added on to the rest of the series. I still plan to do things like class-based views, and I'll just keep adding, fixing bugs, but that's going to be it for now. So thank you so much for following this course. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a bunch. Don't forget to leave me feedback. I would really appreciate that, and definitely interact in that Discord server. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. I'm sure at this point, if you're at this point in the course, you've probably already interacted with me or have seen that. So thank you so much for taking this course.